Thank you for all being here. My first question is we've long had an issue with contraband tobacco in this country. Wouldn't you agree? Like, is contraband tobacco a significant issue that CBSA and the RCMP deals with?
I would agree, still an issue. Yep.
Do you see an overlap between like organized crime in the tobacco trade, contraband tobacco trade, and the fentanyl trade? Is there a strong connection there, or is there no connection at all?
I'm not aware of any connection. But what I will say is when organized crime are involved, if there's a way to move commodities or a substance or anything, they will use the routes that are already pre-established.
So what you're saying is you don't have evidence before you today to say that the groups that are doing it are the same, but that they're using the same supply chain networks to move their product over the borders.
That's a possibility.
So would you say that if we were to aggressively crack down on contraband tobacco, that we would also see benefits in terms of breaking up the supply chain for fentanyl and other drugs, smuggled guns, for example, human smuggling across the border? Do you think there's a potential?
It could have an immediate impact, but as someone mentioned earlier, organized crime will adjust based on legislation and how we operate.
And of course, I know funding is always an issue. We're in tight economic times, and does the Canadian government and provincial governments lose a significant amount of money on contraband tobacco every year?
I wouldn't have the exact numbers, but one can assume that they're losing money.
And if we were to crack down on that, perhaps we could get the revenues and the funding needed so that we could crack down on the fentanyl trade and the drug trade. Do you have any evidence of what organized crime is using the revenues, the profits they get from contraband tobacco? What are those profits being reinvested into?
It's the way of life. It's how they make the money. They get richer by bringing contraband or illicit substances or firearms or human smuggling, and they just reinvest.
So the revenues from the contraband tobacco trade are also leading to the drug trade, the firearms trade, the human trafficking trade. There's a connection there.
Well, as I said, if you look at organized crime, they're involved anywhere they can make a money with somebody.
Okay. So there is a strong connection. We just recently finished up with our long auto study, and we've heard time and time again that stolen vehicles from Canada that are being exported abroad through our ports are being used to finance terrorist organizations around the world. They're being used to finance the purchase of smuggled firearms into our country. This is a very serious issue. Clearly, our ports are the weak point here. Does the CBSA have any recommendations for things that we can adopt to strengthen our ports so that we can not only, protect Canadians from the drug trade, but also give our American and other trading allies and partners assurances that Canada's taking the necessary action to protect them?
So, from the CBSA perspective, we work extremely collaboratively with our port authorities, and you did mention stolen vehicles, and the Port of Montreal in particular, where we've seen the highest volume, has been an excellent partner and has been taking their own initiative on how they can further stop the contraband coming into their ports. The more containers we look at, the slower things go. So
they're coming through the Port of Vancouver, I would assume, given that seems logistically to make more sense. What are we doing to intercept those shipments coming into Canada? How can we strengthen our ports to block those?
So I don't want to speak on behalf of the ports. The work that we do in terms of inspecting and interdicting precursors and other contraband coming in through the ports is through a combination of intelligence, targeting information from allies, information that we have received through the many information sharing and collaborative arrangements we have with our policing partners.
Recommendations on how we can strengthen that today? Is there a plan? We've just been, the President-elect of the United States says he's going to put a 25% tariff on us. So do we have a plan to show that we're taking action on this, or are we currently just working on the plan?
So I'll defer to the minister's remarks yesterday about the plan that was consulted with the provinces and that he has indicated, as has the Prime Minister, that they will talk to the Americans.
So there is a plan?
Your question on the ports, one issue with CBSA is ports are required to provide us space to do our examinations for imports. They're not required to provide us space for exports. That being said, we haven't run into ports that are resistant to providing us that space. But that's an area where there's a bit of a legislative gap that we would be interested in considering.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Motz for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. And thank you to both of your organization's frontline members who are boots on the ground to stand in the gap at our borders and across this country. So thank you for that. We know that through an order paper question that was submitted, that the Liberals lost track of 30,000 individuals scheduled for deportation. Which is troubling in itself. How can something like this possibly occur? Specifically, 29,730 some who are on wanted, warrants for by immigration authorities, and they fail to appear. So how does this happen?
So on removals, indeed, you're right. The removals inventory that we have right now is significant. It's not static. So I will start by saying that. And last year we removed over 16,000 people, the most in a decade, and we're on track to do the same this year. Our officers are very focused on removals. So when somebody has gone through the immigration process and they are not granted status, sometimes they've been here for years. And so it will be time for them to be removed, but it will take a bit of time. The school year will finish and so on. And so just to say that our expectation is that people leave when they are not granted status, and indeed many do.
But keep in mind, ma'am, that in the next 2 years, 2.4 million visas are due to expire. So how do we as a country expect to have the people that should be leaving under those orders be leaving when we can't keep track of the ones we've got now at only 30,000?
Yes. So there's the people that will leave voluntarily. There's the people that CBSA needs to help leave, and I say that not euphemistically, buy their ticket, perhaps put them in an immigration detention center because we are concerned they will abscond. And then those that our investigators and Aaron's staff are looking for all the time. And so to say that we are putting in a big effort, as we did this year, to increase by 59%. But as you say,
there's more to do. There's a lot more to do.
There's always more.
So let me move on to we've seen in the media and know that the Americans have seen a huge increase in the number of people coming from Canada into the United States illegally. Between 2002 and 2022 and 2024. It's estimated that increase was 82% to roughly around 19,000 people in that 2 year. And in fact, about a 680% increase from 2015 when this government took effect to now, Canadians, illegally crossing the border into the United States. Why? How would you recommend we reverse this or mitigate this trend?
So some of it was mitigated with the imposition of a partial visa on Mexico and recent decisions by IRCC and the minister to tighten visa requirements and to end a process that was providing a temporary public policy for temporary resident visas. So those have all had a material impact from what CBSA has seen, and we continue abroad.
Okay, so I want to continue on with the Canadians or people from Canada illegally entering the United States, but of greater concern than that, and that is concerning in itself. There's nearly 1,200 people on various terror watch lists who have been stopped by U.S. authorities entering the United States from Canada, and by contrast, the same people on terror watch lists entering the United States from Mexico in that same time period of 3 years was, right around 200. So, it's concerning. So why are U.S. Border Patrols able to, interdict these individuals, and we seem to have a problem. And I'm going to get to the question of how do these people get in Canada in the first place in a minute.
So I'll begin by saying the way in which the U.S. reports on their data is a subject of discussion. So a certain number of those people, when they say interdicted or encountered, are people going through a port of entry and turned back to Canada. And that happens going the other way all the time. So that's the system working. And, you know, what they say they're on a terrorist watch list, so I don't have information in those specific databases. But I think it's important to understand.
But you have the access to those databases, do you not?
We do.
Yes.
And these are people that the Americans turn around.
Right. And so
so-
then my next question would be, we have
So sorry, the time is up.
Oh, I'll have to use the next round.
Yes,
Stay
thank you.
tuned.
We'll go. Thank you so much. Actually, I just might use my prerogative, Chair, just to follow up on something you said just briefly on the ship rider program. That's a dual American-Canadian. They ride the boat together, and when we cross into Canadian territory, the Canadian takes over, and in American territory, the American takes over. Is that correct?
I brought Matt for a reason, so I'll let him to expand on that.
Thank you, Commissioner. You're correct. It's a truly binational operating program. The members train together. The training is given in South Carolina. And you're right. The premise is that if there's interdiction that's required on the Canadian side, the Canadian law enforcement officials will utilize their authorities. And when the ship crosses over into the U.S. side, there's a respect of sovereignty, and the U.S. law enforcement will use their powers.
Just a brief follow-up. There was you were looking at a dirt rider, like on land comparison, but that never did really come to fruition. Is that correct?
It's land rider, Madam
Land
Chair,
rider,
is the term. I believe it's still being discussed between the two countries.
Thank you.
I would say, Madam Chair, air as well.
Oh, air rider.
We're looking at something.
Thank you very much. That's good to know. Thank you, Mr. Mott. We're going to go to Mr. Shipley for 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to return back to the Commissioner and ask some questions about fentanyl right now. Obviously, we're seeing, everybody has to agree that across Canada, fentanyl is a very serious situation, harming many, many people, affecting families. It's right across the country. Obviously, it's across the world, but we're here today to talk about Canada. Recently, the Canadian Department of Foreign Affairs has been quoted as saying that Canada is now a net exporter of fentanyl. I understand there's been some talk today about how much goes to the States, how much goes here, but overall, Commissioner, would you agree with the statement from the Department of Foreign Affairs that Canada right now is a net exporter of fentanyl?
So Canada is producing quantities such that it would be impossible for Canadian consumers to consume. There is an export. We are considered exporting some fentanyl. As I mentioned earlier, minute trace goes to the United States based on the intelligence that we have. But it is being exported at a greater cost than what the cartel is actually making it right now.
Thank you. And recently there was 11 kilograms of fentanyl originating from Canada was recently seized at the Australian border. That's, I assume, I'm not obviously an expert in the size of that, but I assume 11 kilograms is a lot of fentanyl. Is that a lot? Is that a?
It is a lot, and during my Five Eyes meetings, I do chat with my counterpart from Australia to see how we can work together. Not that we don't work together, but work a stronger partnership in addressing fentanyl.
Okay, so that's just one example. Obviously, we're exporting it here now from this country. Commissioner, could you also confirm that there are at least 350 organized crime groups operating in the domestic fentanyl market, and that these groups are importing precursor chemicals into Canada, mostly from China, for the illegal production of fentanyl?
I don't have the exact number of organized crime groups operating or importing precursors, but I could commit to look in our holdings and come back to you.
Yeah, the Chief Superintendent's nodding a little bit. I know you're...
I don't have the exact number. I was agreeing with the Commissioner, but we could get that figure from Criminal Intelligence Service Canada. We have that data in our holdings, yes.
which would be great. And I think that's really good to have, because here at Public Safety, we're always talking about many of the issues, and some of those are about auto theft, which I know my colleague from Miss Michaud has mentioned many times, and a lot of that can be being fueled from this too. So that's why that'd be good information to get if we could. So I would just like to talk about the United States. They've taken significant steps against the People's Republic of China to stop the illegal flow of fentanyl and its precursors into their country. They have sanctioned dozens of individuals and companies profiting from the illegal fentanyl trade, and both the U.S. and Mexico have bilateral working groups with China to consult on counter narcotics and precursors. As of October 2024, Canada has not made a request for a formal working group with China. Given that 82% of overdose deaths in 2023 involve fentanyl, and that China is the main source country for illegal fentanyl precursor imports into Canada, should we not be willing to take similar steps as our North American allies? Do you not think that would help curb some of the situations going on here?
I would say, Madam Chair, is either we take similar steps or we join our American colleagues and Mexican together, so a stronger force to address it.
Thank you for that. Ms. O'Gorman, since 2019, Beijing banned the production and sale of fentanyl. How many kilograms of precursor chemicals were seized by our border officers?
So, unfortunately, the way we classify precursors and other drugs, they're all kind of lumped together. I will ask Mr. McCrory, we have some data, and it's not exclusively precursors. It's a small amount of precursors and other drugs mixed in there.
Yes, thanks, Madam President. Yeah, in terms of how we track the data, unfortunately, we can't break out the precursors from other drugs. And so the first 3 quarters of this year, we've seized over 21,000 kilograms of other drugs, narcotics, and precursor chemicals.
Sure.
How many, to the RCMP, how many people do you estimate are involved in the production and distribution of fentanyl in Canada? Do you have like a ballpark estimate? Is it 1,000 people? Is it 10,000 people?
I don't have a ballpark figure on it.
So you have no idea how many people could possibly be involved in the fentanyl trade in Canada?
There's a significant group, a significant number of organized crime group, but if you're asking me for a specific number, I can't give you a specific number.
How many organized crime groups are involved?
Over 4,000 organized crime groups in Canada, as assessed by the Criminal Intelligence Service of Canada.
4,000 individual organized crime groups, all with their own distinct leadership and membership?
That's correct.
That's stunning. Now, we heard during the auto theft study from Ontario Provincial Police that oftentimes when they're catching people in the act of stealing cars or as a result of their investigations, that it's often people that they've already been interacting with, people that they've caught previously. In fact, many of these people were out on bail. Are you finding in your fentanyl investigations, when you're cracking down on these labs and you're having these great busts that we like to see, and you're catching people, are these people that are known to law enforcement generally, or are they people that have had no interaction with law enforcement before?
Go ahead.
I'm happy to take it. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for the question. Yes, it's fair to say that organized crime individuals are not individuals that have been arrested only once. We deal with the same individuals and groups very often.
So you would say that in the majority of cases that the people that you're catching in these things are repeat offenders?
That's fair to say, yeah.
Now, in a previous parliament under this Liberal government, Bill C-5 reduced a number of mandatory minimum penalties, and some of these mandatory minimum penalties were related to drug trafficking and the import and export of drugs. And these Schedule I drugs include fentanyl. So we're seeing, as a result of legislation like this, that people who are involved in this deadly fentanyl trade are getting back out on the streets more quickly, and obviously you guys are catching them again in the act. It's clear that mandatory minimum penalties, by keeping these drug pushers in prison for longer, hopefully acts as a deterrent for them continuing that activity, but at least it takes them off the street. How quickly do you find like the time period between these criminals getting out on bail or getting out on the street that you're catching them? Is it like years, like 10 years later that they're getting caught, or are you finding it's more frequent?
So it'd be speculative on my part as to say when they get back in. They're released, most of the times they're released under strict conditions. Some obey the conditions, some don't obey the conditions. And to put a specific timeline as to when they get back involved in organized crime is hard to put a quantified number.
But it wouldn't be a huge amount of time. We could be talking in some cases days, some cases months, maybe in some cases years, but certainly there's a wide spectrum of cases.
I would agree that there's a wide spectrum, as you covered, from days to years to several years.
Anyways, yeah, it's because I agree. We could shut down all the labs we want, but if we're not shutting down the people that are setting up the labs, then we're not going to be very effective at. We need to shut down the people that are involved. What can we do to get these people behind bars so that they're not out there pushing these drugs that are killing members of our communities? What can we do better?
So I would answer. I think there's multiple avenues here. One is how do we stop the precursors or slow the precursors from coming in the country? I do think that we need a strong outreach program to inform the Canadian public of the harm of fentanyl. And the other one is sharing information that is ongoing with law enforcement.
It's killed. I don't want to correct you because I agree with you, but it has killed more people in Canada than died in the Second World War, than Canadians that died in the Second World War, this fentanyl opioid overdose crisis. So I think many Canadians know that this is a deadly epidemic that has killed people in my family. It's killed people in many families across Canada. It's devastating. And I hope that you will get the resources and get the legal backing to be able to continue doing your work and cracking down on these people, because we cannot allow this to continue. As we've seen with this study, it's now costing us our international reputation, and so I support you in the work you're doing, and I only hope that you get all the tools that you need to get that job done. Thank you.
Madam Chair. I just want to change gears from my last and line of questioning. If I got time, I'll come back to it. Recently, the Minister of Public Safety was here and indicated to this committee that he's working on a plan to strengthen our borders. And Commissioner, you had indicated as well that it was reported in the National Post that you had presented the government with a plan to bolster the country's border security. Can you kind of describe what that plan looks like from the RCMP perspective? And I also want to ask Mr. Gorman, for both of you, like, what developments have been made since the minister's meeting with us here a couple weeks ago on the plan, and what is it looking like, and how is it rolling out, and what does it look like moving forward?
So for us, what we've briefed the minister on is really to increase our capabilities when it comes to technology, evergreening technology that we have, increasing resources, and this has already been said by the minister publicly, and having more ability when it comes to surveillance with by means of drones or helicopters. There is an appetite also to, as what I said, when increase the resources, we have to be mindful that like any other organization, we have limited resources, but how can we benefit from maybe other organizations by working together and having additional people at the borders?
Actually, that would be almost the same answer I would give, insofar as that we are working extremely closely on a day-to-day basis with the RCMP as we carry out our mandate at ports of entry, and the RCMP does it in between. And so the extent to which they benefit from technology, we know what new technology is out there and how that would help us increase the amount of seizures that we're able to.
Okay, fair enough. So if I'm hearing you correctly, there's not necessarily a specific plan other than we're going to capitalize on some evergreen technology that we already have. We're going to maybe put some more boots in the ground there. We're going to use some other technologies like drones or those sort of activities along the border. Is there a plan to develop bilateral agreements with the United States and partner in some of those border processes? I mean, I'm not seeing the minister says we've got a plan, or we're going to develop a plan, and yet, we're bolstering a plan we already have, or we're doing something even bolder than we're doing now.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I would leave it to the minister to announce his plan, and as he said, he's consulted the provinces. But just I have to respond to your comment about agreements with the U.S. just because I don't want it to be understood that we don't have them.
Right.
We have them, information sharing, and we're increasing them and operationalizing them. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear that we do absolutely have agreements, multiple agreements with Customs and Border Protection, with the DEA, with the ATF, with HSI. Sorry for the acronyms, but I suspect you know
Right,
what they
yeah.
are. So those agreements are well in place.
So, I mean, it's part of the plan, and I don't know whether the minister has. I mean, apparently he's had conversations with provinces. Was part of the plan to include or have provinces step up, like Alberta made the announcement this afternoon, putting resources, manpower, technology, and other things on the border, spending $30 million to augment the resources there along in Alberta. Other provinces, I understand, are looking at doing also similar things along the border. Is that part of the plan that the government is talking about? Can any of you speak to that?
I can't speak about the conversation that the minister has had with his counterparts in different provinces. What I can say is that public safety at the deputy minister's level has a weekly call. Aaron and I are on the call with deputy ministers from across the country, and throughout the calls, there's a strong appetite to see how they can help. And the Premier of Alberta announcing that they are looking at mobilizing 51 officers. We welcome that. Obviously, as I said earlier in the committee, this is a shared responsibility, and we all want what's best for Canadians and ensure that there's a safe and secure border. So go ahead.
So sorry, Commissioner, that's great, and I applaud the Premier of Alberta for moving that direction. Now, how do you plan with CBSA and the RCMP, who also patrol and are part of the border security there on a very vast border? I might say, because I have all the border crossings there that matter in Alberta. How do you intend to incorporate so that you're not working against each other? So you share intel, you communicate together, you are on operations together. How do you plan on doing that?
Just a very brief answer, please.
Oh, sorry.
No different how we're doing it right now in the province of Quebec, where we're joined to the hip with Les Sautés Quebec, and we're collaborating together and we share the information. You might have joint teams, joint command teams to make sure that everybody knows what each other's doing, and that the intelligence is sharing at the fast pace in real time.
I would encourage you guys to make sure that
Thank you.
happens in all the provinces.
Thank you, Mr. Mott. Mr. Motts with 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just one question. I want to go back quickly to the people on the terror watch list who, the U.S. has intercepted down there. What have we done here in this country to tighten our border security so these terrorists aren't admitted in the first place?
So the scenario you cited were people going to the U.S. and being
I'm talking
turned
about
back.
the ones that they're in Canada already.
Right.
And so what are we doing to make sure that those on terror watch lists aren't allowed to continue to enter Canada?
Okay, but the statistics of people that the U.S. encounters and turns back, they may be Canadian as well. So I wouldn't take that whole number and say they are all foreign nationals into the country. So
I would agree. I would agree with that assessment.
And so to your point, your question, which is for those who have come from abroad who are foreign nationals in Canada being turned away. So certainly our colleagues from Immigration and Refugees and Citizenship would be well placed, but they have tightened up their visa requirements. Mr. McCrory can talk maybe a bit about the security screening process, if you'll.
Okay, yeah.
So yes, so I like to think of it as layers of defense that start prior to the border, and that's where, for example, IRCC requires a visa, and a portion of those are referred to us for security clearing. Okay. I think we did 34,000 applications last year, and had a non-favorable recommendation about 800 of them. Our national targeting.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you for a minute because we've heard some of these numbers before, and I know we all need to do. We all can agree we need to do a better job. But I just want to put a motion on notice before I pass the rest of my time to Mr. Lloyd. Chair, I'd like to put this motion on notice. Whereas break and enters against small businesses in Toronto have risen 19% in the last year, and the Ottawa Police Service is warning of an alarming rise in residential break and enters, the committee undertake a study on the issue of break and enters and home invasions in Canada of not less than 3 meetings, and that the committee report these findings and recommendations to the House. And I would turn the remaining of my time over to Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Mutz. Mr. Lloyd, you have just under 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I also will be putting on notice of motion. Whereas new data shows that homicides in Canada have increased 27%, and the homicide rate has increased from 1.71 to 1.94 per 100,000 Canadians since 2015. The committee undertake a study on the causes of homicide in Canada of not less than 3 meetings, and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House. With my remaining time, we know that where are these transnational organized crime groups majority coming from? Like what countries are they tied to generally?
You have the organized crime group based on CISC's report, 2024 report. You have organized crime groups that work within the country, and you have a percentage of, and I don't have the exact number, but you have a number of groups that have international ties, if you wish. When I look at, when we were talking about fentanyl earlier, we know that the Mexican cartel has a strong presence and are involved in the making and distribution.
Thank you. Maybe this is a question best for the CBSA. Can someone tell us what percentage of import containers are scanned at our ports, and what percentage of import containers are scanned at land crossings, and what percentage of containers are scanned at rail crossings?
So I don't have the percentage, and we would typically not speak publicly about how we do our targeting and the numbers we scan. So it depends on our risk. It depends on the information that we've received. So generally,
we did have a representative from the union that said that there's a 0% chance that anything will be scanned at a rail crossing. Is that true?
Yeah, again, disappointing that they felt the need to put that information out there without any more context. So I'm going to ask Mr. McCrory to address that quite directly. Thank you for the question.
So all goods coming into Canada need to be reported to the CBSA, and as the President alluded to, we do a risk assessment on all those goods. We also have targeting in certain modes that allow us to target. What I would say is that in any mode, when we have suspicion, either based on the targeting, our intel, or our risk assessment, or based on the experience of well-trained border services officers, we will pull that.
Now, we know that the
conveyance
U.S.
aside
discloses
search.
their percentages. Is there a reason why they can disclose their percentages, but Canada does not?
As I've suggested, we get data on all material coming into the country. We use that data to perform the risk assessments, and we prefer not to talk about how many actually will undergo an examination, because we don't want to give away our methodologies.
Would it be a number that Canadians would consider high, or a number that Canadians would consider low?
I think Canadians should take solace in the fact that we do a risk assessment on everything coming into the country.
Thank you very much.